Hello, everybody, and welcome to another exciting, fun-filled, expeditious episode of Radiorama, where, as the name implies, I show you how to work on radios and other electronic gadgets, primarily radios and televisions and stereos and stuff that are from the 1930s through about the 1960s. And today we have, and of course I've already forgotten the model number of it, it is a 1942 Philco. And more specifically, it's a model number 42-395, and it is if we look at the tube count here, it is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 tube set. So it's a modest, decently tubed set. I'm assuming it probably has push-pull audio. Let's see. Yeah, push-pull audio. A decently sized speaker. And a large antenna. This was back in the day when you could treat yourself to the world of shortwave radio. Unfortunately, shortwave, there's not as much, there's a small fraction of what was on shortwave even when I was a kid. And I'm not exactly an ancient person. I'm in my mid-40s. It's an interesting set because it has what we in the radio collecting world call obsolete FM. And here it is up here, and you can see that it goes all the way up to, and basically, I'm trying to read this right, it goes all the way up to 99. I get my shit confused. Kilohertz or megahertz. See, I'm already cursing. I'm not supposed to do that in this episode. This is a special radio. This is a family heirloom. It's being dropped off by this lovely couple. This was her grandfather's, I believe, and maybe if she's looking, she can add some commentary. I especially like sets that have been in the family, and this family took very good care of it, because if you look here, the finish is almost immaculate. Like a lot of people would put their house plants on it, or it'd be sitting somewhere in the sun, or the vacuum cleaner would bump into it, the bottom would be all messed up. But this looks almost pristine. And even though it's got some scratches and scrapes and stuff, those should all clean up pretty easily. These were meant to be pretty shiny from the factory. The shiny look was pretty popular pre-World War II in the U.S. And so sometimes I'll see these where they've been refinished and someone will put a satin finish on it. That's not, in some cases, very accurate. Anyway, this FM is interesting. I'm getting back to this because if you look up the history of FM, it had a interesting sort of fraught history. The person who invented FM is, in my opinion, a unsung hero when it comes to the world of engineers. Edward Howard Armstrong invented FM back in the 1930s. And RCA, who owned the lion's share of radio circuit patents, well, Armstrong at one point was friends with David Sarnoff, who was the then CEO of RCA, Radio Corporation of America, which might as well have been Microsoft in its day. It was massive. And it had almost a monopoly on all of the circuit designs of the era, along with Hazeltine Laboratories, or Hazeltine Corporation. And so, at the time, Sarnoff was not interested in propagating FM in the sets because due to the complexity of the early FM circuits and the cost, it would have been probably prohibitive to include AM and FM on their sets. And so even though it was invented in the 30s, you really didn't start seeing it come up at all until the pretty early 40s. And then RCA kind of did some tricky lobbying stuff. It's a complicated story, but they were able to weasel their way into getting FM basically they were able to get the what am I trying to say here? It's early in the morning. They were able to get the frequency changed slightly so that it made Armstrong's FM circuit obsolete. And I think that came from a decision from the FCC that said television will be broadcast over FM, and Sarnoff could not possibly see giving Sarnoff that win. Now, I could be completely wrong. This happened way back in the day, and there's a great documentary called Empire of the Air from 1990 from Ken Burns. So in 1947, that's when modern FM came into being, and so this became obsolete FM. I'm not sure if I'll pick up anything on that band. It'll be curious to see if I do. I'm looking in this, and this has some of that already on the outside. I can see some of that lovely pre-war rubber insulation where it just crumbles in your hand. I'm hoping that's not what I'm going to expect to see inside the chassis. If it is, there's ways you can deal with that. But obviously we can't plug it in. This cord is beyond degraded, so I'm not. So I'm going to pull the chassis, and we're going to look underneath and see what and what not has been done. I'm curious if it's ever been worked on, because I'm looking at it, and well, we've got National Union tube here, but the rest of these look like they're Philcos. There's another National Union up here. So probably most of the original tubes from the factory are in it. That's not unusual. Here's another thing you'll see in this period of Philco sets, which is it'll say built for television sound the wireless way. And many manufacturers were very giddy about the prospects of FM and television. I can't remember, I think it's the 1939 World's Fair. RCA had a huge building, and they used the World's Fair to showcase, of all things, television. If World War II hadn't intervened, television would have come out a lot sooner. And the idea was, well, people have bought all these huge console radios. They could, theoretically use them for the sound for their television. Or if they get an FM receiver, they could run it through there too. And Philco had this clever wireless transmitter that you could buy that would in turn allow you to run things, as they say, wirelessly through the set. Really ahead of its time. Didn't quite catch on, again, because World War II happened. All the manufacturers had to stop making consumer parts and consumer products. So even though this says 1942, by 1942 the U.S. was well into the war. This was probably sold in 1941, probably right before the war hit. And I say that as an American. The war had already been happening in Europe. And I'm rambling all over the damn place, so let me shut up. And to get the chassis out, pull the knobs. There's a few bolts underneath. And we'll need to mark the wires here. It says red, white, and black. Luckily, it looks like the color codes are here already. And so I can just pull this and pull the bolts to get the chassis out. Here is the chassis. This is probably what I would consider like a medium. I'm trying to think of the word here that would properly describe this. This is probably a mid-level type console. In reality, it's kind of similar to, it's just like an enlarged version of a chassis that I've seen on some of Philco's tabletop sets from the era. The first thing that I see that makes me happy is that their on-off switches they used during this era involved these little cheap switches on these phenolic boards here, and usually they're broken. This one's not broken, but you see all this here? Those are cat whiskers, or little magnetic cat whiskers. We'll need to clean those off. Now, here is the trick with the wiring on these guys. It does have some rubber wiring, but luckily, thankfully, a lot of it's also cloth covered. If you're careful and you just don't disturb the stuff and just let it be, then it's fine. If on the other hand you start disturbing things and you crumble the wires up, then you definitely need to replace it. It's not a virgin set. It's been worked on. This is a replacement. It's not unusual. The electrolytics will go bad with age, but this is probably a 1950s replacement. And up here is one of the original electrolytics. And it looks like we probably have two values here. And then there's one value here for a total of 3 electrolytics. Interestingly enough, it seems like by the time that Philco got to this era, they had ditched using tons and tons of Bakelite blocks, which makes me super happy. It's less work. We have one here, and I don't even have to like look up what that is. That is the across the line um, Bakelite block, and so we'll just replace that with 2 across the line capacitors. No big deal. The rest of these are all marked with their values. This says 0.01 microfarad, if you see that, and they'll have their voltage. All I do is I use 630 volt capacitors for all of these guys. Again, I don't know if the set works. I'm not going to bother powering it up until these electrolytics are replaced. And then there's, again, just a shit ton of, man, am I doing a bad job here. I was like, please don't curse, because who knows who's going to be watching this, especially the family that owns this radio. I'm sorry. Um, but yeah, so off to a great start. This looks like it, quote unquote, should be a fairly straightforward restoration job. Well, the day kind of got away from me. I intended to work on this, but it was a nice day out today, and I decided that I was going to do my typical puttery old man things, and all the gutters in the house are now like lined with Flex Seal. In the US, we have these dumb commercials where this guy who, I don't remember his name, he's like, look, I made a boat out of screen doors and I sealed it with Flex Seal and I'm floating around. So this house has crappy old gutters from when the house is new and they leak. So I just lined it with that rubber crap, so we'll see what happens. And also, my brother came over and helped me make an axe handle for my axe, or at least we bought a handle and we thought we could just put it on there because my wife accidentally broke the old axe handle. It turned out this axe head is a weird head, and we kind of had to carve that bottom part to get it to fit, and that took hours because we don't know what we're doing. But anyway, it's on there now. So now let's get back to the cabinet, and I've decided, since I'm tired, but since it's a nice evening, I'm going to start on the cabinet first versus the electronics, and I might go over and cosmetically clean up the electronics. We'll see how I feel after that, but probably I'm going to start recapping it tomorrow. And I don't want this to be in the sun that long, because you see this plastic is a little bit warped. That's normal, but this is much less warped than they tend to be. And you keep them that way by getting them out of the sun. So this is going to be in the sun just for a little bit as I clean it up, and then I'm going to move it right back in. And I'm going to use this product that it's been around forever. You can get it at the grocery store, called Old English. Because the finish on this is so nice looking, I'm going to use a light finish first. And this will fill in a lot of the discoloration and blotchiness from the UV. But I think once this is on there, it's going to look wonderful. And I'm going to use a bunch of old paper towels. Just drench that whole surface with this stuff. Like, use as much as you want, and then probably going to let it sit overnight and saturate and marinate that surface. All right, well, I spent probably about a solid 45 minutes going over this whole thing. But I got to tell you, it's hard to tell because my lighting's not very good out here, and also it's a little glossy looking because I've got the Old English on it sitting in there. But I've worked on an awful lot of Philco console radios, and they weren't like necessarily a super upper end manufacturer, but they did sell a ton of their sets, and it seems like a lot of their sets just got a little bit more beat up. This one is a 10 out of a 10. Like I seldom come across a set like this in such pristine original condition. And then let me show you something else too. Maybe you guys won't appreciate this, but a lot of times when I get these things that have been sitting around for a while, like these speakers, our metal's all kind of discolored, has like kind of a nasty greenish tinge to it because it's cadmium corrosion. This was just dusty. I just wiped that off of there, and it's like it's shiny new freaking metal under there. And like, look at the paint on the aerial. And up here, like, I just wiped that off, and I left that because that's a chalk mark from the factory. That's a little bit of the radio's history. I'd rather leave things as they were. So likewise, I thought, well, if this was just dusty, then probably the chassis is dusty too. So I'm going to get my paintbrush, a soft paintbrush, and my leaf blower, and dust this off, and maybe I'll give this the wipe down treatment on the bench, and then that'll probably be it for the evening. I'm tired. All right. This thing is like uncannily in good condition. Like all I did was I just wiped it off with a damp cloth. And yeah, the metal's a little bit discolored, but look how clean everything is. Like a lot of things when you get to be this age, like there'll be like rats have gotten into it and crapped all over the place and like corroded everything. Or maybe it's been in a house that was at one point had a leak or something like that. Or maybe you had nasty kids. Who knows what? Or maybe someone smoked like a chimney or had like a bunch of pets. All that stuff that can happen to something that sits in a house for 80 years. And in most cases, not in a house, but for the better part of their lives out in some shed. This thing has survived. This is as close as you could get to having what I would say is a very accurate representation of what you would see from fresh from the factory in 1941 when this was made. So that's nice to see. When I was taking this tube out, it looked like this is not very happy looking at the top. Or maybe the getter did something funny, but I'm going to test that one just because I'm curious. In fact, you know what I'm going to do? I don't have a lot of these Locktail tubes in my collection, so I'm going to test them all because it's easy and it's at the end of the day. And if I have any bad ones, I can go to the museum tomorrow and get more. All right, that'll be it for this evening unless I find something bad. If not, see you tomorrow. Well, I tested all the tubes in here, and luckily all the weird tubes tested good. We have two XXLs and then an XXFM, which has got to be the FM tube. There's two sections inside of that, and then the output tubes I believe are the 7B5s, and one of them tests a little on the weak side. It's supposed to measure about 40 on this scale. It's not even measuring 20, so that's very weak. So I've put a little red dot on it indicating it is bad. No big deal. They made these by the millions and billions. And so tomorrow I'll get a replacement. The last thing I'm going to do is oil all of the little bearings that are located on the tuning mechanism. I'm going to try not to get any oil on anything since it's so nice and perfect. And again, we just want to kind of like get a touch, I mean like just the smallest touch on these little pulleys. It's just going to make things a little easier to move. Just makes it feel better. It's not something you have to do, but I do it anyway. It's just little things like that that makes it all the nicer for the user. And which one of these is the tuner? Let's just put a little oil here, and what will happen is that will kind of like get pulled into that by capillary action, and that'll make that turn smoother. You don't want to get anything on the pulley races themselves, because then it will cause the belt or the string to slip. I guess takes as a string. Likewise, you want to get a little on your fingers and just touch up the top here where the slider moves. Just a little bit, and then that'll make that move a little bit more nicely. Let me just put like a little drop here. Get my fingers wet. And again, what I'm doing, I'm just getting some of the old crud off. Just kind of feeling for it because this is a little delicate. Alright, so that feels much nicer. That'll work in just a little bit. Alright, that's all I'm doing on this thing. Tomorrow I will start on the electrical restoration. The cosmetic restoration is done. Welcome to day 2 working on the Philco. And yesterday I cleaned up the chassis and the cabinet. So the next step is to start the actual electronic restoration process. And I tend to start with the electrolytic capacitors, which is these two guys and this guy. And then we will do a test to see if the set will come back to life. Actually, I'll need to replace the cord too, because the original cord was shot. And then we will, again, as mentioned, test it to see if there's any life. And then we'll start replacing all of these individual little paper capacitors. They are everywhere. And here is just a little bit of word of advice, which is if you are going to replace all the capacitors under here, the engineers knew that you might need to service that, so you just take these two bolts off, and this is cloth covered wire so you can bend it. You just like fold this over that board, then you can get to all those underneath. But before we do that, again, let's replace these electrolytics and see if any life is in it, which I suspect might possibly be the case here. Find out soon enough. Before we get too carried away, it is tempting, if you've been working on these enough, to just assume when you have a power transformer that your negatives for your electrolytics must surely go to chassis ground. That is the case for these two that are inside of here, but not so for this one. The negative actually goes to the other side of this rather large resistor. And so that is probably not going directly to chassis ground. That's important, because if you were to go to ground, you could cause problems. But probably what would happen is the audio would be awful. You'd have this god-awful buzz. So like I said, we'll replace these three, and then we will bring it up on the set and also replace that power cord and go from there. Well, I found it in order to get to some of the leads for the electrolytics, I needed to get into this area, which was obscured by this adjustable slug, these adjustments for the presets in the front. And like I said, you can just fold this out of the way. There's two little screws that hold that in. And then you can get easily to everything underneath. In fact, since I've already loosened it, I'm just going to go ahead and do that. I'll get all of these that are underneath that, instead of having to loosen it twice, because every time you move this stuff around, you could potentially damage something. So just move as little as possible as you can, as less frequently as you can too. All right, I forgot that I'm actually making this episode not just for this channel, but for another channel possibly as well. So what am I doing here is called a recapping job, which is we're replacing all these crappy old capacitors, which are made out of tightly wound aluminum foil with little leads sticking out of either end. This is how they made the capacitors back then. They would put them in a cardboard tube and seal them in paraffin. And it worked. A lot of times these guys are still active in a radio, even though they're not doing a very good job. And so we're replacing them with this new yellow capacitors of the same value. And you can usually get within like 20% or so. On a 5-tube All-American 5, you can get away with anything and they'll still work. But so I do replace all of them. I don't trust any of them. And how I do it to keep track of things is I use my little nippers here. And I'll trim one end of the old capacitor and just kind of like get it out of the way like that. And I kind of leave like a long exposed piece of the old lead, not because I need that much, but because A, it gives me some room to play with, so I can orientate it to where I can get a good connection to it. And some people insist on desoldering everything, and if you want to do that, then there's nothing wrong with it, but I have my own way of doing it, which is I'll find a small piece of the original lead and crimp the one half of the new lead to the new capacitor around it. I'm using a Metcal soldering station, by the way. I like it because it gets things very hot, and we want to make sure that that is a good firm connection. You can test it by kind of like pulling on it. If it doesn't wiggle around, you're good. And then clip your excess lead because you don't need it. And then I see that the old capacitor has a little rubber sleeve going around it. I don't think we quite need that because the new one takes up a lot less space. But you know what? Since I've got the sleeving material here, I just cut a little piece of the old sleeving off. Just because. Probably because I didn't want that to go directly over or under the tube, because there'd be a little bit more heat there. So we're going to back it off a little bit. And again, I'm using kind of a piece of the old lead You can tell I'm doing a bad job of filming this, I'm sorry. Then we're going to make a little hook. And again, the other side of the new capacitor. Bend that over and pinch it into place or crimp it into place. And then again, we want to make sure we get a good, solid, molten connection. Some people, when they start doing this, they will not spend enough time with the heat. It's kind of like welding. Same idea, like you want to get a good, solid, physical, electrical connection there. So that's what I do for every single one of these. Go around and replace one lead of one of the old capacitors with one new, clip the other, and one new, over and over and over again. And yes, this is a kind of boring job, but it's important that you pay attention. That's what takes most of the time, is just replacing all these little capacitors. Okay, I'll have to admit that took a lot longer than I thought it was going to take, and I remembered having this feeling when I saw this, which I was like, yep, it's one of those Philcos from that era. And I thought about past experiences. So then it's when I remembered, oh yeah, they built this era of Philco, especially their consoles, in the most horrible way. This is like working on a German radio, you know, where the stuff's just built in layers. And to replace some of these that were buried in here was like doing brain surgery, because again, we don't want to disturb the insulation, even though it seems like actually a lot of the insulation on this wiring, as awful as it looks, is still kind of flexible. So you can move it around a little bit. In fact, here's some of the old stuff. Like you can see, I can do this with it. That's really surprising. That's like 80-year-old wire. Still, I don't want to, like, you know, futz with it. So all of the capacitors that were underneath here as well as over there, since I made it easier for this thing not to be in the way, I got all that done. So now all that's left for me to test it really is not much. I just wound up accidentally mostly recapping the radio at once, which it's not the most amazing idea to do, because then if you made a mistake, you'll want to know before you do the whole thing. But I was very careful, so I'm hoping that that means something. This needs to be replaced, obviously. But while I'm in here, I can get access to these contacts for the switches. And since we're done soldering things in here, in this part of the radio, I can just go ahead and clean these up a little bit. There we go. And now we can work the buttons back and forth a whole bunch. And that will save us a lot of heartache moving forward, because these things do get clogged up with debris and shit. Clean out the little switch here, make sure it's operating well. And let that soak in for just a minute. There we go. Alright, so let me put this back over, replace that electrolytic, and then we'll, replace the cord. And it's time to finally test this sucker, see if it's going to work. Alright, I do remember there's one other unpleasant thing that has to happen, and luckily this only has one of these. They're called Philco Bakelite blocks, and they're full of tar. At least this one was. That's all the tar that was in it. And that's the across the line caps. That's what's inside of them. They're just capacitors dipped in tar. Anyway, what I do is I'll leave it bolted in place, and I'll drill out the top. I'll drill through the little rivets. That tends to loosen up the tar and crap in there, and then you just like push it out. But before I do anything else, I'm going to dump all that stuff out of the chassis because it's gross. And make sure you sweep it up off the floor, because that will just get all over your shoes and get in the house. It makes a huge mess, and don't ask me how I know this so well. Okay, so we have our new across the line caps. This is pretty important. Turns out back then they didn't quite understand that there can be quite a bit of juice that comes out of an outlet when you first turn your radio or television or anything else in the household on. And your across the line caps need to be such in a way where if they blow up, they're not going to fuse together, and that's what these are. They're X2, Y2 across the line caps. We have a new cord And even have it sitting on this nice little rubber grommet so it's not going to scratch or scrape on the metal. So I think it's time to actually stick the thing in the radio, see if it works. Alright folks, I know that looks haphazard, but trust me, that's not going to fall out of there. I'm going to test the set. I am just more concerned that it doesn't work at all, because you never know. It may look perfect and I may have done what I think is the most perfect job, but we're going to find out real soon. Bring it up on the Variac, see if it's drawing anything first. And it does not seem to be drawing anything, so it may not be on. Let me go look over here, see if I have any. Well, the pilot light is on, so it is on. It's not drawing that much. Maybe it doesn't draw that much to begin with. It's only up about 50%. Okay, the fact that it's not drawing much at all is kind of interesting. It's not going to do much at 50 volts anyway. Bring it up a little bit more. Huh. It's still not drawing much at all. Unless my meter's just not working right. This is fascinating. Whoa, I think I just heard audio, maybe? It's still not drawing that much. Come on, it's gotta be drawing more than that. Well, let me bring it up the rest of the way then. Okay, it's hard for me to tell. Bass treble tuning, standard broadcast. All right, well, let me see if I can fiddle with it without filming. Okay, so what the deal is,
you need special policies for those.
Is that the all electrical contacts and stuff are still really dirty.
Adams came up to make the tackle, but J.P. Mason dry.
Otherwise, it's a pretty happy radio, so that's good news. Welcome to day 3, working on the Philco console, and basically where we left off yesterday is that the set works, but we've got some dirty contacts, and it's interesting. I've been kind of conversing with the owner, and apparently back, right before and during World War II, this set was located on Alcatraz, which is the famous Alcatraz prison island here in the middle of the bay. And I guess there was a small community there of people that worked at the prison or worked for the prison or whatever. And this radio was there in a home. And I believe that the original owner was Italian American. And according to the owner, the radios were required to be either smashed up or have their shortwave bands disabled if you were either Italian, German, or Japanese American, which was stupid because this whole country is made out of immigrants. And I don't know, we've done a lot of dumb things in this country's past, but that's one of them, including putting Japanese Americans in internment camps, even though some of them had been living here just as long as, or longer than some of the other folks that are here and are an important part of California's history and culture. The thing that I need to do is replace the rest of the capacitors that are underneath, which there aren't many, because I wound up somehow doing most of them yesterday, even though I really had no intention of doing that. I'm just glad it worked out, because sometimes if you shotgun things like that, you'll miss a connection and then it won't work, and then you've got to figure out what you did wrong. But I guess I didn't do anything wrong, so that's good. So I'm going to turn it back over, and again, as I stated, replace the rest of the capacitors, and it'll be time to test the radio again. Okay, well, it is now completely recapped, and it was difficult all the way to the end. Everything, I mean, it looks easy on camera, but getting to a lot of these was kind of a challenge. But they're all replaced. It did not disturb any of the wiring, and again, I don't think the wiring is as brittle as I've seen on some of these other sets. But yesterday we were having some problems with the controls, namely the band switch. Let's see which. I'm gonna try to remember what it is. This is on off, so I was having problems in this area. There's a lot of gunk up here, so I think what I'm gonna do is just resaturate these switches with stuff. All right. Likewise, I'm going to get the tone and volume control pots. And yes, I'm putting it on there pretty liberally. And probably what I'm going to do after this is flush it out one more time, then I'm going to flip it over, because I want the excess cleaner to drain out, even though most of it will evaporate. Let me turn it over now. All right, now what I'm going to do is, it's also oftentimes because some of the contacts for these switches is a little complicated or detailed, I don't know. And once you've got cleaner on there, it's not a bad idea just to exercise them a whole bunch. And what that's going to do, that's going to reestablish good contact and wear patterns on the surfaces of these switches, because it's probably, probably oxidized a little bit from being not used for who knows how long, decades. The way that cord looked when we got this thing in tells me it's been a long time. But anyway, just do this. This will save you heartache before you go through all the trouble of reinstalling it and everything. And likewise, you want to make sure all of your pots are good and twisty. All right, so now the next thing I'm going to do is, the owner would like to have audio input installed. Should be pretty easy on this one. And we can just run that direct into the volume control. And I think, however, this set, I'm trying to remember, I think this set might have relatively low gain, so I might need to put a transformer in the front of the audio to boost the signal a little bit. We'll see. I'll find out real quick. I decided to go ahead and solder this in just for giggles. This is the volume control, and I'm running an audio in through a pair of resistors on the positive side of the volume control, which is this side here. You see there's 3 connections. The one on the left is ground, and I can tell because it goes to the chassis ground. And by the way, do not do this on a set that does not have a power transformer. If you do this on a set that is a hot chassis, then you're basically connecting one side of the audio in directly to one side of the AC outlet, which would be very stupid and dangerous. So if you do have such a set, you need to use an oscillation transformer. I may have to use one on this one anyway, because again, I get a feeling there's not enough gain that I'm going to get off of the Bluetooth running in here. We'll find out. But before I do that, I want to put it back in the cabinet. But every time you put it back in one of these cabinets, you have to pop the buttons, usually by pressing them through here from behind. But I find that actually puts more stress on the plastic, so I'd much rather take this off, then put the chassis in, and then you can gently get it over the buttons. But there's a whole bunch of little Phillips screws, wood screws, and I'm going to take those out and put them away in a little container, because I will lose them if I don't. That'll allow me also to get and wax and clean the wood that's underneath there, so that you don't have any of this like discoloration here. Okay, well, I slid everything back in, and I took this cover off, and I'm keeping it up here so I can see what does what. And that's off, so it's off right now, and have it plugged in. Turn it all the way down. 1, 2, 3, broadcast. 1, 2, broadcast. did it turn on? I don't see any pilot lights. Maybe it's not plugged in all the way. Hold on. False alarm. I didn't have it plugged in all the way. All right, it's on broadcast.
You know, and now they're in the big leagues. It's really cool to see how much they
You've created. But every time you drive after drinking, music gets drowned out.
It's in this life.
The results will now include information about breast density. KCBS's Raquel Maria Dillon has more to take the attrition that is.
Oh, hey. Oh, sorry.
No, sorry about that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Have a good day.
Great day.
It's the mailman delivering my mail. Very nice man. Anyway, it seems like it does work. So now what I'm going to do is plug in the Bluetooth thing and see how that sounds. Hot damn, son, that is a good sounding radio. I work on a lot of these things, and sometimes they sound okay, sometimes they sound good, sometimes they sound like pretty damned amazing. I would say this is probably up there in the 75 to 80 percentile as far as sound quality goes. It's pretty good. I mean, I have to always tell myself that this thing is pushing 80 years old. The fact that it sounds good, works good, and looks good, it's a testament to longevity. So, you know, I'm going to give it its due respect here. But now that we know that the electronics are good, the radio's happy, the audio input is happy, we can take the guts back out, and I'm going to take this out into the sun where it's a little bit warmer. I want to get the surface just a little bit warm, and I'm going to start using carnauba paste wax and an electric buffer to further clean up and buff out the original finish, because these came with the piano finish from the factory, and that's my aim for when it is returned to the owner, so that it can look as close to what it looked like when it was off the factory floor in 1941. Moving on, it's time to go back to the cabinet. I just put it on some towels. Makes it a lot easier. Instead of having to stand it up and work on it, it's easier if I can just sit next to it. And I'm going to use my mechanical buffer and some good old-fashioned Meguiar's carnauba paste wax. Yep, the stuff you use on cars. As you can see, it's just a, if I can get the lid off here. I need one of those stupid phone holders that people are using. Hold on a minute. There we go. So it looks like that. And I just put a little on the thing here, and then you just want to gently, this is a spongy pad, gently go over the whole thing like so. Now this is probably one of the longest processes when it comes to working on these. I'll probably spend a few hours doing this. Actually, maybe not. It's almost 5 o'clock. I've maybe got an hour to work on it, but we'll see how far I get. It turned cloudy all of a sudden. That time of year here. Anyway, look how perfect this looks. And I can tell exactly why this is so perfect, because usually when you pull the escutcheon off, you know, that's been there for 80 years and has protected the wood and the finish from UV. So usually this will be a lot darker, and this will be all like considerably lighter. And you can see there's hardly a difference. So this has just been kept out of the sun, which is great. That's why it's basically in mint condition. I mean, this is unreal, really. Anyway, I'm gonna get it back into the garage. I'm not sure what this weather means, if it's gonna get the least bit foggy or whatever, but I do want to clean up the stuff that's in between these slats here. I couldn't really get to that with the buffer, so I'll get in there by hand. All right, so look at this. This is from late yesterday when I was working on it. Might even go back and polish it up just a little bit more. It was getting kind of late yesterday, and it got all cloudy and everything, so I couldn't really see all the detail I wanted to see in the sun. So I'll probably bring it out there. Oh, my bike's here because I got a flat tire, so I got to fix that too. The last thing I want to do before I either repolish the case or put it back together again, I want to address this. All of these are little paper tags that are mounted behind a little plastic piece, and that plastic piece here is missing, so it's falling back down. Ordinarily, I wouldn't care, but again, this is such a perfect radio. It could be made even more perfect if that were fixed. So I cut a piece of plastic, clear plastic, off of this packaging that I had, and I'm going to cut and measure it with a little pair of scissors and slide it in there. It may look a little bit different because it won't be discolored and aged like the plastic, but at least that paper FM will be, preserved and also be a little easier to read. Well, I was able to get that new plastic window in there. I actually had to fudge with it quite a bit to get it in there, so I probably scratched it up a little bit. So now it looks closer to being what the old ones look like. Probably buffed that up a little bit too. But now that I've got the set back out in the sun, I can actually see what it really looks like. Man, it's something. It's not often you see a finish in this good of preservation. So let's make it even more perfect. I'm going to give it one more job with the, again, the Caranuba wax and my little buffer. That just kind of gently massages the original finish, gets rid of a lot of the dirt, and again, it'll bring back the luster and shine that I had when it was new from the factory. So a little bit more work, and I think this guy will be good to be reassembled. And I got the knobs in my pocket. I'm going to wax those too, and we'll stick it back together again. All right, well, I brought it back in. It is pretty sunny out there, and I just want to make sure this doesn't get damaged by the UV. But look how perfect it is now. There's just a couple of scuffs here and there, but it's part of its history. Otherwise, it looks great. The one last thing I forgot to do is repair the rotten FM antenna wire, because whoops, well, that just came out, so I need to solder that in there better apparently. But the original wiring is completely disintegrated, so I'd rather that not have bare metal exposed to a metal chassis. But before I do that, let me make sure that that's soldered in properly. All right, let's try that again. All right, those are on there good. So what I'm going to do is put the chassis back in, and then I'm going to put the escutcheon back on. Then it'll be time to install the hardware and knobs, give her a final test. Probably a little burn-in period to make sure everything's going to work properly over long periods, and then we'll probably be done. So let me see if it all goes back together nicely.
I said no, he said please. I said no, he said please. I said no, he said please. Pretty baby. I said no, he said fly. I said no, he said fly. I said no, he said try. I said maybe. He said no. I said well. He said
Anyway, I've done this for 30 years or more, and this is the cleanest, most perfect Philco console that I've worked on ever. And I say that, not joking. Anyway, I had a lot of fun working on this guy. Let's check out the radio while we're at it. Unplug my Bluetooth there and put it on broadcast.
On September 11th, and for consolation,
Enriched uranium that they now have. It's
3090.
Sacramento.
916.
Offers, in a sense, a little bit of a layer of protection. But, the other thing, listening to you share, complained.
Hey guys, did you know there's a generic form of Viagra that works just the same, but it's 95?
No shit.
Here it is.
Black Frontiers man. But he's overreacting.
Very sensitive radio.
When you schedule your job.
6528.
I'm curious if we'll get anything out of FM. I don't think I will, but we'll find out real soon. I'm gonna get to the end here. I'm gonna crank it up all the way. There's something there.
Singing a song in public without.
You know what? This is crazy, but actually the FM is sort of working. I have no idea where I am on the scale here because the scale's wrong. I'm curious about something. Maybe if it had a bigger, because see right here, it's got a dipole antenna. It goes all the way around the circumference of the case. So I'm curious about something. I'm going to clip the edges of that dipole and see if I can extend it if I pick up more. The fact that it picks up anything's insane. All right, believe it or not, it's picking up FM pretty well. I mean, not a huge amount of stations, but that's NPR and that's KQED, which is a pretty strong FM station.
And she was a professional.
And it seems like it picks up a few others. Yeah, it's not super sensitive, but the fact that that picks up anything, kind of amazing.
Challenge as NPR's Becky.
Probably a few more over this way. Well, anyway, I'm going to include an extra length of antenna if they want to actually listen to it, because around here, NPR is probably one of the, I don't know, in my opinion, one of the better FM stations. Even though I'll give a shout out to KEXP, which is technically from Seattle, but they have a station here too. They play great music. Anyway, that is the end of this episode of Radiorama. Thank you so much for watching. Until the next time a radio comes across my workbench. See you guys next time. Adios.